Hey, I'm Sabrina Joy Stevens. I'm a storyteller, a communication strategist, and a trainer who serves campaigns, causes, and companies committed to the common good. Recently, I was having coffee with someone and they complimented me on some years old pieces of my writing about power and identity that I had completely forgotten about. Afterward, I went back and reread some of them and I cringed so hard I almost pulled a muscle. I don't know about y'all, but I'm a pretty different person than I was earlier in my career, and especially since 2020. The value of my current work owes a lot to the hard won lessons that I learned from making certain mistakes earlier in my career. That's why I wanted to take a moment to get clear on what I mean when I talk about civil rights, so people don't assume things based on how that term has been hijacked by people engaging in identity politics, or based on my own past writing or media appearances that just don't reflect where I stand now. I also want to help clarify some unnecessary confusion in our current political conversations in the hopes that they can be helpful to those of us who care about civil rights but are tired of how political operatives have weaponized that concern to push other agendas. First up, there is a difference between civil rights advocacy and identity politics. True civil rights advocacy is about ensuring that equal protection under the law extends to everyone, regardless of the people groups we belong to. It's about making sure that the liberties protected by our Constitution aren't selectively enforced based on things like skin color, sex, religion, or lack thereof, etc. The responsibility to protect our civil rights belongs to everyone who cares about liberty. No political party or people group owns civil rights. By contrast, identity politics functions by politicizing existing identities or inventing new ones to agitate for preferential treatment. When people start saying things like, we need present discrimination to fix past discrimination, we know we've gone beyond civil rights into identity politics. Discrimination cannot fix discrimination, no matter what kind of person is doing the discriminating. That stokes resentment, it fuels mistrust, and it fuels divisiveness and sometimes even violence, which we've already had way too much of. We also need to question this trend toward creating new identities out of every desire, experience, life circumstance, and so on. There's a difference between who you are and how you feel. There's a difference between who you are and what you desire. There's a difference between who you are and what has happened to you. When we elevate these things to the level of identity, we're basically handing shady political operatives the puppet strings to jerk us around with. By opting into politicized or made up constituencies, we make ourselves really easy prey for people and organizations who brand themselves as saviors of those constituencies. It enables them to manipulate us into funding or voting for them, even if they're not actually doing anything to improve our lives or our communities. Speaking of which, we need to beware of people who exploit identity to amass money, power, and influence. Now, I support people and organizations with specialized expertise that helps certain groups of people exercise their civil rights, like nonprofits that help folks with disabilities access services and actually use their rights. But I'm very wary of media figures, politicians, influencers, and public intellectuals who appoint themselves as representatives of their group. It's usually a money grab, a power grab, or a relevance grab. It's a way of making people feel dependent on them to address problems we already have the means to transcend if we look beyond their reductive narratives, learn what's really going on, and take responsibility for ourselves and each other. We also need to beware of identifying with our politics. Ask yourself, do you think of your political views as something you hold or as an extension of who you are? Do you say things like, I am a Democrat or I am a conservative versus I support the Democratic Party or my views typically lean conservative? When we move from being people who engage in politics to being people who identify with our politics, we're very easily tempted into surrendering our political judgment to others instead of carefully weighing each issue and candidate on their merits. We are all understandably overwhelmed by the sheer volume of everything going on in the world. But it's dangerous to let political identity become a mental shortcut for filtering new information. Bad actors, people who manipulate the public in order to hoard power and wealth at our expense, they exploit that in-group bias to stop us from questioning our side's policies and practices, even when they hurt the people and issues we care about. When we see a trending situation or are faced with a policy choice and we ask ourselves, what does my side say about this, before consulting logic and evidence, that's a red flag. When we immediately assume people are more or less moral based on their political affiliations instead of their actions and impact, that's a red flag. No individual or like-minded group is right all the time. If we're making our choices based on group consensus instead of evidence, we're guaranteeing that some of our choices will be bad for us and others. And again, shady politicians and organizations exploit that sense of identity with our politics to manipulate us into supporting them or giving them our money when they don't deserve it. All this vote blue no matter who, or if you don't vote for Biden, you ain't black, or support whatever to own the libs, that's nonsense. This lazy habit of picking people based on labels instead of merit is why we have so many raggedy candidates in all the major political parties. Civil rights are about securing equal opportunity, not guaranteeing certain outcomes. Real life is too complex to write off all disparities as evidence of injustice. Outcomes alone are not evidence of discrimination. Of course, injustice is sometimes a factor, but there are other geographical, technological, social, and biological realities which shape our choices and outcomes. Civil rights advocacy is about clearing practical and policy hurdles so people don't face unfair barriers or treatment. Identity politics tempts us into imposing new barriers on so-called privileged groups or demanding that every profession or arena of life be statistically representative, regardless of actual people's preferences or aptitudes. Civil rights advocacy is about learning from the past so we can do better in the present and future. Identity politics chains us to the past by treating people according to our group's historical status instead of our specific current realities. Civil rights advocacy is about preserving the best of our constitutional framework and ensuring it protects all Americans. Identity politics is about dismantling that framework with no clear plan to replace it. If we allow ourselves to be divided and duped into dismantling the republic we inherited from past generations, bad actors will step in to replace it with some form of communist or fascist tyranny. It is critical that we let sound moral principles, logic, and evidence guide our decision-making instead of identity. There is so much more that I could say about this, but this is already a lot. Thanks as always for listening, and I'll see you in the next video.